Hi, and welcome everybody to this FAIRPoints event. A bit about FAIRPoints. We are a community-driven event series that highlight pragmatic measures for FAIR implementations. And FAIR, the FAIR guiding principles that was first coined in 2016. They are a set of recommendations and advice on how to make our data findable, accessible, interoperable, and reusable. And while the primary focus here is scientific data, in this sense, it applies to all types of digital objects. And the main question that drove us into creating FAIRPoints was, how are these principles applied in practice, and how can they guide our daily actions? And we believe that to truly comprehend the applications, the real world applications of FAIR, we also need to have input from diverse disciplines and from diverse demographics. And we need to understand how other people and other sectors incorporate these principles into their practices. And to go basically beyond geographical boundaries to enable the adoption of FAIR on a global scale. And to that, we have several different activities, including community discussions and some events. We have keynote events, we have podcasts, we have projects, and platform where we offer also summaries of our conversations and summaries of those events. Our podcasts are driven by both Donnie Winston, who's our co-founder, and with the FAIR Data podcast, our collaborators. And we delve into different aspects of FAIR in practice. And this particular series is Ask Me Anything style events, which are meant to bring subject matters and experts from RDA, from EOSC services, from FAIR Digital Objects Forum, and from our community as well, into focus to understand how their expertise and their tools and services and so on help in the application of FAIR. This is funded by the RDA and EOSC Futures Ambassadorship. And we've had different themes, and this is the last of our 5 themes, which is equitable and transparent access to information and knowledge. Yeah, I just wanted to highlight the FAIR and Open Science Forum that we have, together with the FAIR Data podcast, to drive community discussions, to have a place for the community members to come together, to share information, ask questions, and just spark discussions around FAIR and open science together. A bit of housekeeping for today. Please stay on mute. And if you want to voice something, raise your hand. And we have notes. I've pasted them in the chat. I will do that again. And these notes are for you. We do have a code of conduct, and I have that here. Yeah, and the code of conduct, please be respectful, honest, and inclusive, and open to learning from everybody. We don't attack and demean or disrupt or harass, and we do not encourage this behavior either. Be patient, allow others to speak, use the Zoom reactions. They're there to facilitate for us to see who wants to voice something, and to prevent people from talking over each other. Please use them, and use the chat if you want to voice something. And we have full guidelines on our website. Please have a look at that if you want to report anything or such. So with that, today's talk is on equitable access to knowledge, and we have 2 distinguished speakers. We'll start with Sharif Islam. I'm gonna stop sharing. And Sharif is the data architect at Naturalis Biodiversity Center in Leiden. He is currently focused on building the DISCO, distributed system of scientific collections infrastructure and with emphasis on FAIR principles and interoperability with local, national, and international projects. Thank you so much, Sharif, and floor is yours.
Yeah, thank you, Sarah, and the FAIRPoints team for organizing this. I think this is really amazing, and it's really great to be here. I will share my screen. Yes, it's a short presentation. I'll be talking about the DISCO projects. So primarily, I'm involved in with a lot of other people. It's a big community effort to building the system that will be becoming soon a European research infrastructure. And yeah, if you go to disco.eu, you'll find more information, but I will quickly mention why we're doing this. So our primary focus is the scientific collections we have in the museum. So behind me, you see the museum I work for in Naturalis. So these are specimens, different samples has been collected for the last 200 plus years. Primarily, of course, the focus is the European collection. Historically, for several reasons, these collections grew up in Europe, even though the samples and specimens that we collect represents sort of the biodiversity of the rest of the world. That's another historical complexity there. But the data and the objects are there. And as you can see, we're working with more than 170 national facilities in different countries to build a virtual collection. And of course, this started with physical collections, but more and more digitalizations happening. We have images, data, sequence data, trade data, measurement data, all sorts of data coming together to understand these objects, but they are basically also in a way a proxy for our nature to understand what happened before, when it was collected, what's happening now. So there's a lot of scientific application, and that was basically the idea behind to propose in the European roadmap to have a research infrastructure, an integrated approach to all of this collection and research. And we have researchers physically going to these collections also for research. And even though a lot of research is happening digitally, a lot of these things still need to be happening, needs to happen physically. When you have to collect samples, you have to physically go somewhere. When you have to, put these things in the collections. So those things probably still happen, but we still want to do that in an integrated fashion. If a researcher wants to move or go to different places, but it's not integrated, we want to fix that. So for example, a lot of researchers visit museums and then they publish paper. We want to connect all of those interactions with the different stakeholders that they come across, both from the field to the museum, to the lab, to the collection. So you can think of it as a data lifecycle around these objects. So from a fragmented model, we are proposing a integrated model that will have wider access, and it will hopefully lower cost. It will be optimized, and of course, we want these data and access to be findable, accessible, interoperable, and reusable. And of course, most of this data will be open. We do have some data around endangered species, and some museums have historical human collections. So some of this data we don't publish. The metadata might be published, but as open as possible, as legally as closed as needed, we will be providing this data to the rest of the world. And of course, we're also working with other organizations and other initiatives that are related. And we're still in the transition phase. So we just finished our preparatory project, and we're here. And then hopefully within a year or so, we will become a research infrastructure in the landscape to properly provide some of the service. But in the meantime, we have a lot of sandbox and prototypes, and we're also working a lot with data models and data standards. So I'll talk about those in a minute. So if you want more information, I can definitely provide. One of our core idea is to make this data actionable and fair, is this idea of digital specimen. So you can think of it as a digital surrogate or a digital twin. So it's not just a web page or just a copy or an image. We want this part to be much more dynamic, because even though the physical objects objects are static, there are things happening about this species, about this object. We have new data coming in. There are, of course, historical data, but there are all sorts of things happening. So we want this data to be part of that and provide a platform and service that we can do these things dynamically. And of course, have the connection integration with the physical things. Oftentimes, we do have sampling activities where the physical specimen might be destroyed, or there could be a natural disaster. We still want that connection to be there, the provenance to be there, but this still could be a new object that the researcher can use. So imagine millions and billions of this working together to provide us questions that we ask about biodiversity and climate change. And of course, as I said, we're working with other organizations. This is not happening in a vacuum. There's already a lot of policies and standards that museums are using. Digitization have been happening for the last 20 plus years in different parts of the world. So we are building on all of these things, but we're also building new services based on persistent identifiers and making this digitalization workflow much more streamlined. And of course, with the help of the persistent identifiers, connection with other data classes and workflows are important. So think of it, all the things that were happening in the physical domain, with the data curation and stewardship, we still want to bring them here as well. And this is where FAIR principles will help us. Another way we're applying it, and this is where the FAIR digital object layer come in. And you can also see some of the possibilities of cross-domain interaction. So we have this levels of data and metadata where what we call the FAIR digital object layer, where some data about that object stays with the persistent identifier system. This is one way to implement it. And then you have the richer services and APIs and data here. So for example, you could have terabytes of data and images in this repository. You have a PID identifier that's being referred in a workflow or in a paper. However, you might not have the capacity to get to those data. And this is where access issue might come in. However, you still might want to know what this is. You might not have, let's say, bandwidth to get terabytes of data, but you want to say, okay, is this useful for me? So some of those things could be easily queried based on this FAIR digital object. So this is another way we're also trying to think of how different types of metadata can help with the access. You can also restrict things with operations. You can provide license informations, different local contexts and things like that. That could also go here. I mean, of course, the richer data will still be here, but you can have this separation as well. So building on that, this is an example how we are using the global handle system, which is a technology that's been around for a while. And if you're familiar with digital object identifier or DOI, this is something that runs behind it, basically. So this is how some of those records look like. So this is not the actual data. This is the metadata that stays in the handle system. And then if you want to get to the data, you basically resolve this record. For us, it's the specimen record, but this could be an image or data sets or other things. So with the FAIR Digital Object Forum and within our community, we spend a lot of time to thinking about what elements make sense. Like, for example, I want to know the license, I want to know the type, I want to know the specimen name that's part of it. So small sections of data that can be done, and primarily for machine operations. So we call this PID record or FDO record, and their specification coming out from the FDO forum about this as well. We're also working with other organizations like DataCite. Mapping is something very important, something that what we call, it might be something different in other domain and other schema. So this kind of mapping we've been working on to figure out what makes sense. So there are common elements that will be coming from the DataCite schema, but we have our specific things that we need. For example, there's a common term called creator. It could be the paper or the publisher. So for us, it's something different. So we would like to map those things. And we're also thinking about citation. All of the specimens are used in publications, but not everything gets cited properly. So this is something we want to work with the community and the publisher to understand how they could cite properly. And of course, all of our digital specimen eventually will get a DOI, persistent identifiers. So we want those DOIs to be used and linked for this specimen that was used in the study. Another service we're currently working on, what we're calling annotation. As we mentioned, that these, even though the physical objects are static, but the data, the knowledge around it are changing. So all sorts of physical objects can be turned into a representation in the digital object realm, and we can annotate that. And there's a lot work done on annotation, so we're relying on some of those activities, specifically coming from the W3C consortium. Basically, annotation is just a comment on something, but you want to make that relationship strong so you can find them. So FAIR also matters here. So a lot of these annotations often not connected to the things that they're annotating. So we're also experimenting with this data model and the service. This is you can actually see some of this in our sandbox. Again, these are not production grade yet, but you can go to sandbox.disco.tech and see some of the digital specimens that we built. So the here idea is that you can also trigger machine annotation, because we have, as I said, millions of these objects. A lot of time you cannot do this manually. So here's an example where, for example, we have a specimen with a leaf or other organs. I want to run a service that would detect that and provide some information, and then maybe I can do something with that. So those kind of things are very common nowadays to apply these models, and we want to integrate that within our system. So that provides sort of the things that we're working on. And if you want more information, please go to our website or also ask questions. Thank you.
Thank you very much. And next up, we have Karl Meyer from Ghent. I'm not sure if I'm pronouncing it correctly. Please feel free to correct me. Karl has been working in the internet industry for almost 30 years, initially as a consultant with UUNet and later through a range of ISPs across Europe and the Middle East. He has been at Ghent for 11 years as service marketing manager, covering the full range of services from high performance networking, security, cloud services, and trust and identity services. And he's also a fellow of Cambridge Marketing College and author of 4 books on digital marketing. So thank you so much for joining us today. And yeah, the floor is all yours.
Thank you very much, Dan. Thank you very much, Sharif, for the initial presentation. That was really, really interesting. It's very interesting from our point of view, because we don't often necessarily see how users are using things like services that Ghent is producing. So it's very interesting to have this kind of combination of providers like ourselves and, you know, the next level in the process as well. So I'm going to briefly introduce Ghent to all of you. Most of you will know of Ghent or will at least know of some of our services that we provide. We are a group of around 40 NRENs across Europe, and we support over 10,000 institutions across that area with around 50 million academic users. Those are both students, researchers, staff, and across that entire area. We also provide connectivity to the rest of the world, to South America, North America, the Far East, Africa. We have a very large input into the work which is going on in Africa now to develop research education networking in those areas. And we've been working in that area now for over a decade, and we are very, very pleased with the results of what's going on in those areas. In terms of what we do as an organization, we started off as predominantly focusing on network connectivity. And that's why the national research education networks are our partners in each country. So we provide high performance networking to virtually every university within Europe, and also organizations such as CERN, ESA, the European Space Agency, and also we're doing a lot of work with the Square Kilometre Array in South Africa rather, and Australia. So we have come from a networking environment, but we have developed a great deal of services above that network. And today I'm going to talk about some of those services. Other services we deal with are cloud services. Many of you will have heard of OCRA, Open Clouds for Research Environments. We are a major player in that environment, and we are now starting the work on OCRA 24, which will provide lower cost access to cloud services for institutions across Europe, and areas such as data ingress and egress, which is obviously absolutely vital for what we're all doing, which is accessing, sharing data is absolutely crucial that we manage those processes. And we also have a range of security facilities and services that we manage. We've seen in the last couple of years a huge development in the areas of DDoS, distributed denial of service, and phishing activities and so forth. Our networks are very much under attack, and we are doing a lot to protect those networks and thence the data which is actually using those networks as well, because all of our data around the world is networked these days, and breaches in the network and breaches in the security of the network are absolutely crucial to prevent, because the data we have is so valuable to all of us. And the area that I'm really going to want to talk about today is our trust and identity areas, and this is really comes to the accessible principle of FAIR, in that we are helping to manage the access to data and making sure that the right people can access the right data in as quick and an easy and as manageable and scalable way as possible. So, oops, sorry. We all know of single sign-on services, single sign-on services using Facebook IDs to access various services and so forth. But the work we've done with EduGain over the last decade and a half is very much to expand that into the R&E community in a very, very scalable way. And this is done by utilizing the institution's identity that you already have, so that when you join an institution, you have a staff ID, which allows you access to your email and your staff resources and so forth. And through processes of federating and interfederating those identities can be then used and reused across a range of services, not just within your institution, but across your country and indeed worldwide. And we're now working in 79 federations in 79 countries across the world. As you can see from our lovely map, we are in all the orange places. And we are supporting well over 9,000 entities, both in identity providers and service providers. And this number of identity providers is crucial, because unlike kind of a monolithic system that Facebook or Google or Microsoft has, where everybody's identity is within one place and it's all managed within their silos of data, each institution within the EduGain Interfederation actually manages their own user data and their user access. And this is absolutely crucial for later on. I'll explain why it is absolutely crucial for later on. Because what happens is that when you're accessing data, you can then use this web of trust that we've created through EduGain, so that the data that you are looking at can look at your credentials from your home institution and go, yes, I have a relationship with this institution, I understand you, I respect you, and I trust you, therefore you have this level of access to our data. And you don't have to create an account, and you don't have to create a username and password within that organization which you're accessing the data from. And most importantly, they don't have to manage those. So they don't have endless calls in terms of trying to refresh passwords and reactivate accounts that you've lost the access to, and all these kind of things. They utilize the trust they have within your home institution. And the absolute crucial part of this is that when you cease to work within that institution or cease to work in that project or whatever, then your identity can be suspended by your institution. Said, right, okay, thank you very much. Bye-bye, Karl, no longer working for Xeon. Brilliant. That means that all of the accesses for all of the services that I have signed up for across the world now instantly know that I no longer work for Xeon. And so therefore, any privileges and any access that I had as a result of me being part of Xeon are instantaneously removed from all of those services in one go. This is the removal of users is actually crucial for, obviously, for maintaining integrity and security of data. We want to make sure that only people who can use our data are actually able to. But the thing that we find most of all is that, when we create an account with somebody, we set up an account and they work with us and they say, yes, absolutely, I trust Karl, I'm going to set up an account and here's your password, Karl, and everything else. What often happens is that those accounts just get lying around, and they're dormant accounts or they're misused accounts when I leave. And that removal is actually sometimes more important and more valuable than the creation. And so it is absolutely vital that we manage that process. So what we're doing here is we're improving access, we're improving security by providing this web of trust around the world, and we're removing a lot of the management overheads and costs. And as an example of this, there was a piece of news a few years ago now from LIGO, the gravitational wave experiments, where they identified the first gravitational wave when two black holes merged. And this, of course, generated huge amount of data in the sites which we were actually sensing these gravitational waves. And thousands of researchers around the world all wanted access to this data at the same time. Now, under a normal circumstance, somebody having to manually create all of those thousands of accounts and manage them and check credentials and share usernames and passwords and everything else would take months. You know, absolutely, it would be huge effort, a huge amount of manpower to do that. Because of the way that EduGain works and this web of trust that we've created, people could start accessing that data within 48 hours, and that is, you know, an incredible benefit to all of those researchers, because those researchers could actually get on and start working on the data immediately, rather than having to wait for their credentials to be approved and so forth. So these things have a real measurable impact on users. So what happens is that these credentials are checked in real time. So if I stop working for Géant on Monday, then on Tuesday, all of my access goes. And we can actually have a great deal of trust in those credentials, that they are still valid and they are still current. And one of the key things that it does is it reduces the number of bilateral agreements where a service provider, be that a commercial service provider, says, yes, I want to access all these things, and they have to generate specific one-on-one relationships with all the institutions. That no longer has to happen. So there's a huge reduction in overhead, a huge reduction in work in managing all of those relationships, which saves us a huge amount of time and money, and lets us get on with doing the real things that we're supposed to be doing. What we've done recently is developed a service called EduTeams. And what EduTeams does is it brings control back to the user. So although with EduGain it creates this web of trust of credentials and so forth, it gives everybody the same kind of level of access, and you then have to manage access on a one-on-one basis, so that somebody signing into one of my websites starts off as a contributor. I want to upgrade them to an administrator. I have to go into the system and actually open the bonnet and play around to change them into being an administrator. And this takes a lot of time and a lot of effort. So what EduTeams does is it allows you to create team types and user types. So you can actually add people. You can add Sharif and Karl into an administrator user type. And this administrator user type has this level of access to these 17 or 18 services around the world. And if Sharif then leaves, we can then just say, okay, Sharif is no longer administrator, and all of his privileges and all of his accesses go at the same time. And it really helps you clean your access management and your user management, to really make sure that when you are looking at data, you know who is accessing the data, how they're accessing the data, what level of access they have, and you know that those people are still valid users. And this service is, we feel, a massive improvement on what's going on in the world, because it helps people stop focusing on the doing of the IT and helps those users get on with actually doing their research and actually using data in the way that they're supposed to use the data. So we are very excited, as you can possibly tell, by these services, and we feel that these services are hugely foundational to the concepts of FAIR and data use and data reuse around the world. So this is a quick summary. As it makes a single point of management for communities and allows users to leverage this networking connectivity and the identity of users to enable collaboration across the world. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Karl. It's really exciting stuff, and we have a lot of questions. But before we go into the questions, please allow me to introduce our moderators for today. We have Nina Turbanova. Nina is please correct my pronunciation. Nina is a PhD student at the University of Dublin. Her research project is mostly in the plant genetics area. She's active in several open science communities, including AGAP, an open science practicing community for early career researchers that she helped to found recently. We'd love to hear more about that, Nina. And what she likes most about working with these communities is that has enabled her to join truly interesting projects outside of her research areas and to meet like-minded people who became her collaborators and friends. We're super happy to have you. We also have Omar Farouk Ahmad. Omar is a nuclear physicist and a research fellow at the Center for Renewable Energy and Sustainability Transitions. He's also involved with Open Life Science in a different role. And we have, we don't have Emma today with us, unfortunately, due to some health issues, but Emma has helped prepare this event with us today as well. And she is a PhD student at the University of Edinburgh, and her background is in neuroscience, and her current work focuses on developing workflows to automate the synthesis of evidence from animal research. And she's the current organizer of Edinburgh Open Research Initiative and Edinburgh Reproducibility. So that's about our moderators, and please feel free to take it from here. Any one of you would like to start this discussion?
Thank you very much for the introduction, Sarah, and to our speakers for very interesting presentations. And it's...
Oh, I think there's been some technical issues, Nina. Oh, is it just me or? No, okay.
It's not just you.
Oh, okay.
Thank you so much.
Omar,
Let me chip in from here.
thank you.
Maybe she's having some network issues. Thank you so much, Sarah, and the presenters for sharing with us what the companies have been doing regarding open science and aligning with the FAIRPoints and the commitments. So we have questions here. Donnie, can you please unmute yourself, or do you like me to state the question for you?
I'm worried about my network.
Okay.
Please go ahead.
Okay, so no problem. I will. So Donnie asked this question to Sharif. For the FDO implementation based on the handle system, was there a deliberate decision to make the metadata elements not be identified by handles themselves? For example, zero types like DESC or newly minted ones.
Yeah. So the question.
Yeah.
So he's basically asking about these metadata. So basically, these are the metadata in the FDO profile. So we do use one of the existing ones from the handle system, which provides different locations. So this one we can use to resolve the handle to multiple locations. So for example, if I have one HTML, one JSON, one XML, I can actually do that here. For these, we opted for our own. For basically, we needed to describe a digital object type, but we also needed to think about the physical object. So there are specific reasons, and in order to make it, it basically was a balance between how much. So if this was a handle, there would be another resolution that the machine has to do. So we are basically made the decision to have less resolution, but still have structure. So kind of finding a balance between using structured text and mix of handles. So some of these elements here will be PIDs and handles. For the type, it will go to the type registry, which will have a PID. but the element itself, we decided to use text.
Okay, thank you so much, Sharif. And there's another question from Sarah. Sarah, would you want to say it, or you don't mind me going?
Sure. Yeah. This is for Karl. I see you've implemented the single sign-on on different other services as well. Maybe you can in different parts of the world. What were some of the challenges with regard to data privacy or protections that you might have faced in different regions of the world?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, it is a major issue because everybody has different levels of data protection in different areas. All of us know that America has different levels of data protection than the rest of the world in many senses, and certainly in terms of the European Union. What we do is, because we are a federated service, we manage the connections to the national identity providers. So each of the research education networks in each country manages an identity provider, a federation within their country. And that federation runs under their national constraints and their national data controls. When it comes to the interfederation, we have a very clear code of conduct in terms of what data is transferable and reusable regarding a user, in terms of the attributes associated with that user. So there are a very limited set of attributes which are transferred. And indeed, when you do sign into a new service, what happens is that the new service actually provides you with a pop-up window to say, this is the information that we are sending to the service that you wish to access. Are you happy for us to continue? So there is actually a step in the process. You sign in, and then a pop-up window says, as part of this, we will be sending across your email address or your institutional details and your association with your staff, researcher, whatever. And then you can accept or deny those at that point. So you are you have that control yourself, but also because we have this very strong code of conduct, and it takes a long time for a federation to join Edugain, because we are working with them very closely to make sure that this data privacy and this user privacy is absolutely crucial as a part of the ability for them to join the interfederation service.
Thank you very much. Nina, welcome back. Do you want to take it from here?
Apologies, I really have problems with the connection. I have a question for both our speakers, if that's okay. Do you receive a lot of requests or questions from the countries where you don't provide your services yet? So is there a big interest? Has the word spread out? Thank you.
Yes, definitely. I mean, we do receive either interest in joining our consortium or also working with the data. But I think primarily depends on, so for example, the museums that we work with, we have different sizes of museums. So if the museums are well supported in their digital competency or capacity, sometimes it's easier for them to connect, even though maybe they're not part of our network, but they have other capacity to do it. But if the museum is not, well supported in the digital competency or human resources or other funding issues, even though they might be interested, then we do run into sort of issues. So that's one of the reasons we have projects like DISCO, where hopefully within a year or so, when we are operational, we can pool our resources to provide support to the smaller organizations. So that's basically idea. So we do get a lot of feedback, but at the moment we cannot help as much as we'd like to.
Yeah, thank you. And in terms of our organization, obviously we're now in 79 countries where it's actually working. We also have a couple of candidates which are already starting the process of joining. It takes quite a long time for people to join. We we're finding that over the last few years that the rate of growth is starting to slow, simply because we do have seen that we're getting the majority of users connecting up now in terms of the large national federations connecting up. One of the prerequisites for joining EduGain is that you actually have a national federation, because EduGain connects the national federations. It's a kind of pyramid system in that respect, not a pyramid system in the marketing sense, but in terms of, there's a layers of hierarchy. So we are finding that there are many, many countries which don't have a very well established national federation. What we are doing in that process is actually helping those guys build their national federation out. We've done a lot of this work in the Middle East, in actual fact, in helping research education networks build their national federation. So it is a long process, but we're working at all layers of that process to make sure that users do notice the benefits and can join us as quickly as they can. But we are seeing a lot of interest in Africa. Certainly, we are seeing a huge amount of interest in all of our African partners in terms of creating their national federations and joining us.
So another question for both the speakers. Do you face challenges in building this type of complicated ecosystems of access and interoperability?
Yeah, definitely. I mean, in particular, especially when as soon as we talk about connecting data sets, connecting different elements, different objects, we run into problems of course, data interoperability. One of the common problems we run into is semantics, basically. So in one data set, somebody's, for example, talking about location. In another data set, somebody's talking about latitude and longitude. They might be talking about the same thing, but in a different way. So even though we might be able to connect, then we might not be able to use those data set properly. So that problem starts sort of in the data level, and then on your service level, you basically have to have some sort of system that can recognize, okay, A means A here and B is there, and we can map them and we can reuse them. And this is where also the idea of FAIR and persistent identifier comes in. If all of these have identifiers and proper metadata, we can build services on that. So it's sort of in a two-way street. We still have to work on cleaning the data, improving the data. So there's a lot of data curation and data stewardship. That means, of course, resources and training and funding. But we also have to build the services from the top that can take advantage of this. So in a way, oftentimes we see effort maybe more on the infrastructure and less on the training. And sometimes there's some effort on the training, but there's no infrastructure. So that finding that balance is tricky. And of course, especially in the IT and data infrastructure, things are changing constantly, as we also have to be flexible in a way. Like the technology that we're using now, probably 3 or 4 years from now, it might be obsolete or it might be totally changed. So our system and design has to be flexible enough to think about those things ahead of times.
Umar, for us, the issues are slightly less complicated in that respect, because we are utilizing fairly well established now technologies such as SAML to manage and curate the data paths and between the different systems. Our work is largely in terms of the administration, in terms of ensuring that those systems are working to the relevant standards. And we do actually, as part of the process of signing in a new federation, do a hell of a lot of testing to make sure that, just as Sharif said, when they're saying one thing, they actually mean the same thing. And managing that vocabulary within a system is sometimes the hardest part, so that when you say a word, everybody in the conversation knows exactly what that word means. Because often if a system's been implemented in a country, they may simply just use a different vocabulary for different attributes within their system. So our guys spend a lot of time just basically making sure that everyone's talking out of the same dictionary when it comes to integrating and connecting up the SAML systems and processes across there. And one of the other interesting things is that I saw Donnie's other question about ORCID, because there are a lot of different systems around there. You know, we have ORCID, and you have all of the commercial systems, you have Google IDs and everything else that we all use ourselves, and providing a kind of an abstraction layer between all of those different systems to ensure that when they are communicating across to each other, they are utilizing the same terminology, the same language, is crucial. We're actually doing a lot of work at the moment, this year, in fact, in developing this kind of core AI abstraction layer, so that ORCID and Google and everybody else and all of the educating interfederations can communicate using the same lexicon across them, and that is a major piece of work to provide that clean interface, so that for when you're looking at using EduTeams or whatever, you can then manage users. So, oh, I've got an ORCID ID, fine, we can do that. Oh, I've got a Google ID, oh, that's fine, no problem. So I've got an ID created by GlaxoSmithKline. Yeah, no problems. As long as you're talking the same lexicon as we are, we can manage you and we can provide you access to the relevant projects that you need access to. So yeah, we're doing a huge amount of work in that area.
Thank you. Nina, how's your connection with us today? Oh, okay. And so while waiting for Nina to reconnect, is there anyone else who has a question they would like to voice themselves? Please feel free to unmute and ask. Okay. Omar, do you want to take it?
Yes, this question is for Sharif. What does curation involve for Disco?
Yeah, thank you. That's a very good question. Yeah, as I mentioned, the museums that we work with has a long history of physical curation. So basically, you know, our collection managers and people that work with these objects know how to take care of the physical objects. I mean, we've been doing that in a lot of our institutions, you know, for the last 100+ years. And these objects are, you know, can be a small box to dinosaur bones. So the idea of curation within museum is a very, you know, inherent, you know, and integral part. With the digitization, a lot of these things is changing. So the curation also now involves, you know, taking care of your database, taking care of the catalog record. So those practices within our community has been there and established, and there's a lot of standards. But each institution's kind of doing it on their own. So there are global aggregators that sometimes help us to make these things globally usable. There are global aggregators and domain-specific aggregators. So what I think DISCO will be promoting with our service and the FAIR principle is that we want to take that curation effort in a much more community-oriented way. So you can still have your catalog ID. I mean, this is very similar to a library catalog record that you will have. You still need to maintain that because, you know, it's asset management. We want to know physically where things are. But there's also scientific data that will be published to the world, and we want the wider community knowledge to contribute to that. So sometimes it's not easy to do that within your internal catalog system. A lot of these catalog systems are commercial, even though they're open source. They're very done for very specific purposes. So we want to sort of extend that into the DISCO domain, in the FAIR digital object domain, to provide people opportunity to curate this data and annotate their data. So one example is that, let's say, you know, you are a citizen scientist, but you have a lot of expertise on a particular species. You could come to our platform and look at our DISCO data and the specimen data and provide your input. And depending on the input, it's up to the museum and the other expert to decide how to incorporate that within the data catalog. So that's one way we're thinking about sort of opening up the idea of curation.
Okay, that's great. So it's like involving more diverse people. Anyone can come and join in and
Yeah, of
provide
course.
his own expertise.
Yeah, and the idea of authentication and authorization is important. So that's where also EduGain and ORCID will come in. So we are also working with one of our partners to figure out how do we not just authenticate, how do you also understand who is doing what. So there's that part is also very important. So a lot of things will be open, but if somebody wants to edit things, annotate things, we want them to be authenticated and authorized, because that provenance information, also for attribution, we want to, if you contribute an annotation, that's in a way a scholarly contributions. We want it to be attributed as well. So that's where the ORCID ID will be important. But we also want to know what institution you're affiliated with, or if you're a citizen scientist, where you're coming from. So that also is connected.
That's great. So this brought us to a question Karl asked. Donnie asked to Karl that what is the relationship between EduGain identity and ORCID identity? He has heard of ORCID, but only heard of EduGain today. So that is question. What is the relationship?
Okay, yes, I've answered some of that bits in the actual chat session, but I'll do it a bit now actually. ORCID could be considered as an identity provider. Basically where you create an account, you're validated by ORCID, and it says, yes, absolutely, you're a valid researcher, and it then generates a set of attributes about you as an individual. So under those circumstances, they are within our kind of hierarchy an identity provider, but they are an identity provider which isn't connected to a national identity federation, which is why we're doing this work within EduTeams and within the core AAI abstraction layer to enable them to have their identity attributes passed through the system. So yeah, they are a slight edge case in that respect, but we are doing the work to ensure that via EduTeams and the core AI service, we can still utilize those identities, and those identities can be transferred through EduGain to the various service providers that are accessible through EduGain.
So I just wanted to highlight something here, which is a very neat example of limited resources. So even if you have EduGain or EduRoam and you can't access it due to the national infrastructure being not reliable, how do we deal with these situations? Or is there anything being done to deal with the situations, maybe in terms of support to national infrastructures or not? And this is, I know it's probably not on EduRoam, but we currently have a proper example where Nina's EduRoam failed as well.
Yeah, absolutely. EduRoam is a very special case. I've been working with EduRoam now for 10 years on its services, and the way that EduRoam works, we could probably do an hour and a half ask me anything on EduRoam itself on its own. The difficulty you have with EduRoam is that the physical Wi-Fi access points are inside an institution, and they're managed by the institution's IT department. And so unfortunately, if they are failing or if they're underspecified, then you do have problems like Nina is having at the moment. EduRoam only provides the authentication. So a user says, hi, I'm Karl, can I join your EduRoam hotspot? And the institution goes, well, I have no idea who Karl is. He doesn't work for us, but I know a man who does. And then they go through the chain, up through the chain of identity providers until they get to the giant identity provider, and they go, yeah, Karl's fine, yeah, fine. It then sends it back and says, yeah, fine, join in. So EduRoam only does the yes no ability to connect. If unfortunately the physical infrastructure in the institution is a little bit shaky, then we are only doing is providing access to it, and the quality of it is unfortunately below us. In terms of EduGain, what we do is we make sure that in terms of the national federations and the service providers who are connected to the national federations, they do have a degree of quality of service as assurance to make sure that they have got duplicate systems and so on and so forth, so that there are few single points of failure in terms of the authentication process. So in terms of EduRoam on its own, as an example, EduRoam had over 6 billion authentication requests put through it last year. So 6,000 million authentication requests put through it last year. So it is quite busy and quite popular. But unfortunately, we all know that Wi-Fi in a particular institution or a particular cafe or a particular library can be a bit shaky. And unfortunately, I think that's the problems that Nina is having at the moment.
Yeah, unfortunately, it exactly is. And thank you so much. I do have a question regarding how your tools and services, that's a question for both our speakers, how have they contributed to a better awareness of the FAIR principles and open science practices? And mostly focused on outside of the realm of our bubbles of open science, where we talk about open science and FAIR practices.
Okay, well, I'm on Anso and Sharif, so I'll start. Géant has a rather interesting situation in that because we are very much a foundational system, we are largely invisible to the vast majority of people. I mean, Donny himself said he had never heard of EduGain before this session today, and I like to call it the kind of the bridge builder problem, in that no one cares about who builds the bridge until the bridge falls down. And EduGain is essentially that bridge which works to connect users to the data. And no one cares. They just drive over it billions of times a year, literally. And they don't notice the bridge is there until the bridge stops working, and then they start jumping up and down on us. So we have a huge problem in terms of marketing and quotes selling our service, because the end users, the people who are signing into systems, don't know, don't care, really aren't interested in what we do. We then have to work with the service providers and through organizations like Disco and so forth to say, if you're wanting to get the widest possible access to your data, then become a service provider through your national federation and interfederate it through EduGain, so that users around the world can actually access your data. So those are the people that we have to speak to and raise our awareness with, because even when you're an end user and you're signing into a system, you never see the EduGain logo. You simply see the logo of your institution, your university. You see your sign on screen from your university with its logo on the top. That's what you see. The EduGain logo is not visible anywhere. So we have the bridge builder problem, and I think that a lot of foundational activities like ourselves, like FAIRPoint and so forth, have this issue, that we're there building the infrastructure, we're building the structures, the systems, the data structures around, and people don't notice. They just notice when they fail. So our success is defined by our anonymity.
Yeah, and for us, because we're still not operational, so in a way we're probably learning from the rest of the community, organizational like Géant and others. And one thing we do actively is we promote FAIR within our projects, and over the last couple of years with some of the Disco and other related projects, I think we did successfully raise awareness of the importance of the metadata and the persistent identifiers, in particularly why persistent identifiers are important. So that's something is very central within our data architecture, and I think that helped our community also to understand. And this again comes back to citation, attribution. So for example, a lot of our physical objects, people take in the lab, they do sampling, and sometimes if you read the paper, you'll see these objects are mentioned, but not in the persistent machine actionable way. And oftentimes a lot of the support staff and the people that are working on the labs, maybe they're mentioned in the acknowledgement, or sometimes not mentioned. And oftentimes, you know, depending on the situation, you know, they would like to be attributed and acknowledged. So some of these things are also important awareness. I think we're trying to build. Again, coming from the data infrastructure, we're showing that these are amazing things you can do with metadata and identifier, and you know, you can show that your data and objects been used, and hopefully we can take this up to our funding authority also to show the impact, so we can get more support.
So we have a question from Chris and then Nina.
Yeah, it's just a follow-up to Sharif, you know, that the whole the thing that we're all sort of beholden to, citations, you know, demonstrating sort of the use and impact of your services. And you mentioned sort of mixture, so also the use of, you know, handles. And so I'm wondering how you wrangle those in a system that is sort of DOI centric.
You mean how to promote the usage or integrate?
Yeah, integration, but also you know, how you can, you know, what you were talking about, sort of demonstrating impact.
Yeah. So I think, you know, the handle system and both the DOI implementation have a lot of flexibility around API and metadata. So for example, I mean, we do have to build some of these things. I mean, some of these things are inherent. For example, if how many times a DOI has been clicked or cited, a lot of these things has to be built around our system to track that. But I think our struggle in the beginning would be to adoption as well. Like, we want people to actually use these identifiers in their workflow. So that will also, you know, so it's kind of like a, you know, one comes after another. But if we don't have the system to do all of these reports, then we can also cannot show the impact. So we're still thinking about this carefully to see how we can have wider adoption, but how we can also show the impact. I mean, DOI-based systems are been around for a while. So within the scholarly community, it's an acknowledged way of at least for citation and linking. So that also helps us to use that background of that system to promote as an identifier. So that's one of the reasons we also went towards sort of the DOI ecosystem.
Thank you. Nina,
Thank
are
you.
you
If I
still?
may ask the next
Yes.
question. Yeah, can you hear me? Sorry for that. I was listening and I heard both our speakers mentioned different challenges they are facing, and it is obvious you are both on different part of your journey. So what type of support do you feel would be the most beneficial to you? Would it be financial support or technical support or more manpower? And where would you like to see the support coming from?
Yeah, I think the financial support always is probably the biggest struggle for open research infrastructures. So we primarily, you know, we're funded by the European Union, and we do get a lot of support from other organizations, but that's where the primary funding comes in. I mean, this is partly probably this is coming also from personally, so I'm not speaking for the whole organization. I think the way some of this funding model works they're very bureaucratic and complicated. So even though there's a lot of money and we're getting support, the process of applying as a consortium and waiting for the funding, for the approval and the process, it's a whole cycle that can take between 6 months to a year. So those things sometimes do create challenges. So let's say we have a great idea now and we're responding to that call. By the time we get funding and get going, it might be next year. So sometimes, you know, you do have to plan ahead. So one thing could be that even though there's money, it could be a little bit more flexible how this funding agency are allocating, and so a little bit more agile about this. So that could be something improved within the government and the European level funding.
In terms of Géant, Géant's an EU-funded project. We've been running now for over 20 years, and the development of EduGain and AI services is a major part of the work that we're doing with them, and they have been very, very generous with us for a very long time, and they see the value of us. In terms of what we're looking to do to expand, it is basically to raise awareness with predominantly service providers now, in actual fact, to show them the value of looking towards federation and interfederation to manage their access, because otherwise these organizations go, well, okay, I need to create my own user and access management systems and so forth, which is a huge amount of investment, a huge amount of time, and basically we are looking to say, well, providing you're looking at working with your national federation or looking at, then we can actually help you remove a lot of that management overhead and management cost within your organization. And that's what we're here to do, really, basically, is to wave the flag for the benefits of utilizing things like EduGain and EduTeams to help manage access to systems. So yeah, that's what we're up to.
Do you have a question mainly for Sharif? So you're part of a EOSC services, and how has EOSC helped facilitate your exposure to a wider audience? Or I know you're still not in the implementation phase, but how do you feel being part of EOSC is helping in bringing in other demographics from different parts of the world?
Yeah, there's quite a few projects that are going on in the EOS level that helping us specifically for the persistent identifier, the metadata. There's a lot of work going on what's called the PID graph, basically connecting different PIDs, and there's also crosswalk registry, again, the mapping that we were talking about. So all of these things are still in the process in some of the EOS level, and then we are also participating in finding out more about this, and hopefully as we are implementing and changing things, we can actually use those thinking from the EOS level to help us, because now we are not providing the full service. I don't think we're getting any new user coming from the EOS side, and sometime within the community people find us, find out our project. So that's something we will be working with the EOS to see how the EOS marketplace or the EOS catalog will expose our services, and then that also brings back to the metadata. I mean, if everybody's describing the service in a more structured way, that's sometimes very easy to discover. But at the moment, most of the current user base coming from our community. So that's something I think definitely we're interested to expand.
Yeah. Are there any more questions from our audience?
I think Johnny had an interesting question I will quickly answer. So he basically asked, how could Disco, can I? Yeah, how could Disco digital specimen data made be available approved institution by the EduGain? Yeah, so yeah, at the moment we are using either your institutional ID or ORCID ID. So if you have the institutional ID and that's part of a federation like EduGain, you could use your institutional ID and go through the authentication process and then log into our platform. If you don't have that, then you have to use ORCID. But then the ORCID, depending on the level of data we get from our ORCID, it doesn't tell us enough about the institution affiliation. So that's something we're still trying to figure out. If we cannot verify the institutional affiliation, how can we do that? So I think that's probably a known challenge, right, Karl? I think if you're not part of a federation, you use ORCID, then yeah, it's a known challenge. Yeah.
It is a known challenge because I mean, what you then have to do is just to put in this layer of saying, okay, this federated identity has then got these attributes attached to it, and so you have to manually manage the attributes of that user, because you can't get those transferred across. So there is a layer of additional management there, but you know, unfortunately, that is a known issue and a very, very complicated issue, because data management and data privacy means that some attributes cannot be sent across. We cannot reliably transfer attributes because we know that some places they may leak, and so therefore we have to be very, very low common denominator in terms of what we send across.
And ORCID has a way to verify things, but I think not all organization does that. So the records coming from ORCID could be unverified. It could be also fake records. So that's something we are basically have to do all the verification authorization on our side. Yeah.
And could you see any way how the ORCID could improve this? Any suggestions?
Yeah, I think again, probably Karl probably knows more about that. I think it's working with the local and regional organizations. So, for example, each organization has their identity catalog. So they have your email address. They have all the roles that you have. So basically, somehow that needs to be transferred to a service like Disco. So if you're a data manager, I need to know that. If you're a student, I need to know that. So that's where EduGain comes in. But all of these things should not be in ORCID. ORCID is more like a, you know, your publication and things. I don't want to use ORCID to verify that you're a student. So it's a different functionality, but ORCID can help because we use ORCID in other ways to find expertise. So you can actually have a lot of information in your profile that could be verified and can tell you that, oh, I'm an expertise on Butterfly.
Yeah.
EduGain does not have that. So that can be important for us because we want to know an expert on Butterfly worked on a data curation activity on Butterfly. So that's a very specific thing. So that's where I think some of those metadata and record could be helpful.
In not wishing to diss ORCID in any way, ORCID is almost in that respect a kind of a LinkedIn for researchers, because you register and say, hey, here am I, and so forth, and there's obviously a level of data checking and so forth. But as you know, Donia said, if people leave an institution or they stop doing something, then it's up to them to tell ORCID that they are no longer doing those things or they're no longer affiliated. And so there are issues with the validity of a lot of the data, certainly the historical data, but it does provide a great deal more granularity in terms of data about what they are doing and who they are than we can actually manage, because we are very much as to say, yes, they are a real person, but we don't necessarily know exactly what they are doing.
I'll quickly put a project URL in the chat. It's called Bionomia. It's a great example of how one of our community members used ORCID. So these are ORCID IDs for our collectors. So basically the researchers that collected specimens, and then we use Wikidata ID for the collectors that are passed away. And basically there's a code that reading the ORCID profile, it figures out what area of expertise you are, and then it flags all of the specimen that was connected attached to that ID. Sometimes you have to do a lot of name disambiguation because there are a lot of common names. So there's a lot of algorithms that focuses on if somebody says this name, last name is, and then actually it's a community platform, people can go and fix it. So this is a great example that levels of identifier can help you to connecting. So basically this website can connect all the collectors that worked on a project, and you can also see, you know, who else was on that expedition. So you can also build network. Again, you have to do a lot of name disambiguation, but yeah, it can help to those kind of things, but not for verification. I mean, you still have to verify and curate the record. Yeah.
Thank you all very, very much. I think we can, if there are any more questions, please add them to the document. We can send them out to our speakers to help us out with answering them. I think we can move on to the wrap up. Julian, do you want to? And thank you all for the speakers and the moderators.
Yeah, thank Karl, Sharif, Umar, Nina, and of course our fearless leader Sarah for putting this on. It's been the last of a series, and I've seen a lot of familiar names. So thank all of you who've kind of come and supported us through this entire series of really interesting talks about how we can use FAIR in the real world and in our real work. So I guess yay, we did 5. It was great. This is our send-off. I hope to see some of you in Salzburg and RDA. I'll be there. And so any final thoughts from Sarah, Chris, or Donnie, who've done a lot of the work setting this up and getting this done?
Yeah, just please, we're continuing the discussions. Visit our website, keep up with the events, sign up to our mailing list to get our news. And we have a Slack and the forum as well. Donnie and Chris, been amazing as well, and in the back behind the scenes. So thank you so much. And
great. Well, come on to our Slack site, join the conversation, and yeah, we'll keep the community going.
Yeah, and Karl and Sharif, thank you so much for all your work and for joining us today. It's been brilliant learning more about everything that you provide. So thank you.
Yeah, thank you. This was really nice. Thank you.
Thank you. Very, very nice to meet you all. And hopefully some people have understood what EduGain is all about now. And you can find out some more information. The slides have got URLs on them. So take a look at the slides. Great.
Thank you.
Thank you so much for the presentations. Thank you.
All right. Well, everyone have a lovely day. And remember, never fail.